I worked tirelessly for weeks on an innovative campaign for an important client. I spent countless sleepless nights, perfecting every detail of the design, adjusting colors, fonts and layouts until everything was perfect. I was proud of my work and eager to present it to the team. However, my excitement quickly turned to frustration and anger when I realized that Brian, my boss, was appropriating my ideas and presenting them as his own. It all started a few months ago when Brian started showing an unusual interest in my work. He often called me for one-on-one meetings where we discussed my ideas and concepts. At first, I thought he was genuinely interested in mentoring me and helping develop my skills. However, I soon realized that he was using these meetings to steal my ideas and present them as his own in team meetings. I remember a specific incident where I came up with an innovative idea for a branding campaign. I spent hours researching and developing the concept, and was excited to share it with the team. However, before I had the chance, Brian presented the idea as his own. I was shocked and hurt, but I didn't say anything. I thought maybe it was a misunderstanding and that next time he would give me due credit. Unfortunately, this has become a pattern. Every time I came up with a new idea, Brian stole it and presented it as his own. My hard work was constantly being ignored, and I was becoming increasingly frustrated. I decided I needed to take action to ensure my work was recognized. The morning after the latest incident, I called Lucas, a talented programmer at the agency, to talk. He had also been a victim of Brian's manipulations and knew exactly how I felt. "Lucas, I need to talk to you. I'm tired of Brian stealing my ideas and taking all the credit. It can't go on like this," I said, my voice full of determination. Lucas sighed and nodded. "I know exactly how you feel, Jessica. He did the same thing to me multiple times. We need to do something about it. I'm planning to take action at the next team presentation. I want to make sure everyone knows it's my work and not his," I explained. "Count me in," Lucas replied decisively. "We can plan something together. Let's expose the truth." With Lucas' help, I started planning a strategy for the team's next presentation. We knew we would need hard evidence to unmask Brian and make sure everyone knew the truth. Over the next few weeks, Lucas and I worked tirelessly to collect evidence. I kept all the emails, drafts and documents that proved the original ideas were mine. Lucas, with his programming skills, created an alternative presentation that included all the evidence we had collected. "We need to involve Maria," Lucas suggested one day as we reviewed our strategy. "She's a veteran of the agency and has witnessed Brian's deceptions for many years. I'm sure she'll want to help." I agreed, and, the next day, we called Maria for a meeting. She was just as frustrated as we were with injustices in the workplace and agreed to help us. "I'm tired of seeing Brian get away with all this," Maria said, her voice firm. "We will expose him and make sure the truth comes out." With Maria on board, our plan began to take shape. We were determined to ensure that my work was recognized and that the corruption at the heart of the agency was exposed. The team's next presentation would be unlike any other. I would finally have the chance to show everyone who was really behind the brilliant ideas Brian had been presenting as his. That afternoon, after another exhausting day at work, I called Lucas for a chat at the cafe on the corner. Lucas was a brilliant programmer, with whom I had worked on several projects. He had already been in similar situations with Brian and knew what it was like to have his job usurped. We sat at a table near the window, where the afternoon sunlight illuminated the room with a golden hue. "Lucas, I need to tell you something," I began, as I absently stirred my coffee. "Of course, Jess. What happened?" he replied, with a worried look. I can't stand seeing Brian appropriating my ideas anymore. He's been doing this for months and I feel like I'm becoming invisible at the agency. I've thought about confronting him, but I know he'll find a way to get me to deny it. I need help exposing what he's doing." Lucas sighed deeply and took a sip of his coffee before answering. "Jessica, I know exactly what you're going through. He did the same thing to me multiple times. The truth is, I'm fed up with this situation. We need to do something about it. Are you serious?" I asked, surprised by his readiness to support me. Yes, I am. In fact, I've been thinking about exposing Brian for a long time. But on my own, I've never had the courage. If we come together, maybe we can do something that will really make a difference, he said, with a determination that I had never seen it before. So let's do this. Let's plan something for the next team presentation. We need to make sure my work is recognized, but we also need to expose Brian for who he really is. Do you have any ideas on how we can do that? I was eager to hear your suggestions. Lucas stopped for a moment, thoughtful. I think the first thing we need to do is collect irrefutable evidence. What if we could get Maria on our side? She's a veteran of the agency and has seen so many things happen. If she joins us, we'll have a powerful ally. I agree. Maria has a lot of experience and respect within the agency. If she's on our side, it will be harder for Brian to disavow us. Let's talk to her tomorrow, I suggested, feeling a new wave of hope. The next morning, we met Maria in the agency's pantry. She was serving coffee when we approached. Maria, can we talk to you for a moment? I asked, trying to sound calm. Of course, Jessica. What happened? She replied, with a welcoming smile. It's about Brian. We know he's been misappropriating other people's work and we need to do something about it. We're planning to showcase what he's been doing at the next team presentation, but we need your help, I quickly explained. Maria looked at us for a moment, and then her face hardened. I've seen Brian do this to so many people over the years. You have my full support. Let's end this injustice once and for all. With Maria by our side, we began to plan our strategy. We decided that the best approach would be to collect concrete evidence of my work and present it during the meeting. Lucas suggested that we record our brainstorming sessions and keep all emails and drafts that prove the ideas were mine. We need to be careful, Maria said. Brian is cunning and will try to debunk everything we present. We need irrefutable evidence. Over the next few weeks, we worked tirelessly to gather all the necessary materials. Lucas, with his technological skills, was able to access old records and emails that proved that Brian repeatedly appropriated the work of others. Maria, with her vast experience, guided us on how to present the evidence in a way that left no doubt about the authorship of the ideas. We are ready, said Lucas, on the eve of the presentation. We have everything we need to unmask Brian. I nodded, feeling a mix of nervousness and excitement. Tomorrow will be the day the truth finally comes out. With Lucas and Maria's help, I was ready to make sure my work was recognized and expose Brian for who he truly was. Justice was about to be served. When I decided we needed more help, I knew exactly who to turn to, Maria. She had been at the agency longer than any of us and had seen it all. Maria was a veteran, always professional, but I could see in her eyes that Brian's injustice affected her too. I met her in the pantry one day while she was making her usual coffee. Maria, can I talk to you for a minute? I asked, trying not to sound too desperate. She looked at me curiously, but smiled gently. Of course, Jessica. What's going on? I took a deep breath and started to tell everything. Lucas and I are trying to unmask Brian. He's been stealing our ideas and appropriating our work, and we need someone with his experience to help us gather hard evidence. Maria stopped stirring her coffee and looked at me with a serious look. Brian's been doing this for years. I've fallen victim to him myself. He's smart, but not untouchable. What do you have in mind? I explained our plan in detail, how we intended to gather evidence and present it at the next team meeting. Lucas and I already had some evidence, but we knew we would need a lot more to really make an impact. Maria listened attentively, nodding from time to time. I knew he was a problem, but I never thought I would have the courage to face him like this, Maria said, with a new determination in her voice. Count me in. I know where to look for more evidence and I can help build a solid case against him. That night, we met at Lucas's house to detail our plan. Maria brought a folder full of documents that she had kept for years, evidence that Brian had stolen ideas and manipulated situations for his own benefit. "Look at this," said Maria, opening one of the documents. Old emails where Brian clearly borrows ideas from me and other colleagues. He's always been cautious, but he's made mistakes here and there. We can use that against him. Lucas examined the documents with interest. "This is perfect. We can create a timeline showing a pattern of behavior. We can also record our upcoming meetings to catch Brian in the act." "Exactly," I agreed. "And if we can get more colleagues to join us, we will have an even stronger case." Maria smiled. "I know some people who can't stand working with him anymore. I'll speak to them discreetly. The more support we have, the better." We spent the next few weeks gathering documents, emails, and anything else that could be used as evidence. We recorded conversations, captured screenshots, and even got some colleagues to sign statements about how Brian had stolen their ideas. Lucas used his programming skills to organize everything into a cohesive and convincing presentation. The day before the big presentation, Maria called us for one last meeting. "We're ready," she said, a gleam of confidence in her eyes. "Tomorrow is the day." "I hope so," I replied, feeling a mixture of nervousness and excitement. "We cannot fail." Lucas put his hand on my shoulder. "We're going to make it. We have enough evidence to take him down. He won't have anywhere to run." That night, I could barely sleep. I mentally reviewed our plan several times, trying to anticipate anything that could go wrong. I knew we were about to face an uphill battle, but I also knew we weren't alone. With Maria and Lucas by my side, I felt like we could finally make a difference. The next morning, I woke up with a clear purpose. We were about to confront Brian and hopefully change the agency's culture for the better. I looked in the mirror and told myself, "You can do it, Jessica. You can do it." And with that, I was ready to face whatever came next. As we researched, an unexpected fact came to light. I was sitting at my desk on a rainy afternoon, reviewing old documents and emails exchanged with Brian, when a detail caught my attention. It was a message that shouldn't have been in my email, a copy that had apparently been sent in error. The sender was none other than a senior company executive, and the content was incriminating. I called Lucas and Maria for an urgent meeting. "We need to talk, I found something big," he said, trying to control his excitement and nervousness at the same time. Maria was the first to arrive at my table, followed shortly by Lucas, who seemed equally intrigued. "What did you find?" Lucas asked, leaning over my shoulder to look at the computer screen. "It appears that Brian is having an affair with a senior executive." "Look at this," I pointed to the email, where the language was clearly personal and there were references to meeting after hours. Maria's eyes widened. "That explains a lot. Why does he always come out unscathed from scams? He has strong protections up there. We need to use this carefully," I warned. "We can't just throw this information on the table, we have to build a solid case." Lucas nodded. "I agree. Let's structure this in a way that is undeniable. We need more evidence to complement this. I'll see if I can track down any more emails or messages. Maria, can you handle administrative documents and see if you find anything suspicious?" Maria agreed. "Sure, I'll do it right now. I'm tired of Brian always getting away with it. It's time to change things around here." The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity and emotions. Each discovery seemed more shocking than the last. We found records of after-hours meetings, exchanges of favors, and even manipulations of financial reports. We were building a strong case, but we knew that the revelation of this relationship had to be the icing on the cake, the piece that tied together all the other evidence and exposed the corruption at the heart of the agency. On a particularly tense night, Lucas showed up at my house with a flash drive. "You won't believe what I found," he said, almost breathless. "What is it?" I asked, feeling a mix of anxiety and anticipation. I was able to track text messages between Brian and the executive. "There are things here that are compromising, to say the least," he handed over the flash drive with an expression of triumph. I spent hours analyzing those messages. They were clear, direct, and completely committing. There was evidence of contract manipulation, embezzlement of funds, and even veiled threats to silence anyone who dared question his actions. We knew our chance to unmask Brian was closer than ever. In a final meeting before the big presentation, we discussed the last details. "We have everything we need," said Maria, with a fierce determination in her eyes. "Let's end this once and for all." "I agree," I replied. "We need to be strategic. First, we present the original work, clearly showing that the ideas are mine. Then we reveal the secret relationship and, finally, all the deceptions we discovered." Lucas smiled. "They won't know what hit them." That night, I could barely sleep. The anxiety and anticipation were overwhelming. But there was also a feeling of imminent justice, that finally, the truth would come out. When the day of the presentation arrived, we were ready. Lucas, Maria, and I knew that this was our only chance to change the course of things at the agency, to expose not just Brian, but all the corruption embedded in the company's structure. We were nervous, but prepared. And, above all, determined to ensure that the truth prevailed and that our work was finally recognized. When Lucas, Maria, and I finally got together to discuss the plan, we knew it wouldn't be easy. We were immersed in documents, emails, and proof that the work was, in fact, mine. We decided that the alternative presentation would be our main weapon. Lucas, with his programming talent, put together a visually stunning presentation that not only highlighted my work but also included incontrovertible evidence. "We need to make sure everything is perfect," I said, as we reviewed the plan for the umpteenth time. "Every detail counts." Maria, ever the voice of reason, responded, "We'll make it, Jessica. We're prepared. Brian doesn't know what's coming." Lucas added, "And we can't forget the final bombshell. The secret relationship between Brian and that executive. That's going to be the icing on the cake." I agreed, but my stomach was in knots just thinking about how this revelation could affect not only Brian's career, but mine as well. I knew it was a risky but necessary move. On the morning of the presentation, I felt a mix of nervousness and determination. I was ready to face Brian. We entered the conference room and I sat next to Lucas and Maria. Brian started the presentation as always, with his arrogant air, as if the work was all his. "As you can see," Brian began, pointing to the slide full of graphics and designs I spent nights creating, "this campaign is a true masterpiece." I couldn't wait any longer. I stood up and interrupted, trying to keep my voice steady. "Excuse me, Brian, but I think there's something everyone here needs to see." The atmosphere became tense. Brian looked at me with a mixture of surprise and anger. "What are you doing, Jessica?" "I'm showing the truth," I replied, as Lucas projected our presentation onto the screen. "These emails, drafts and documents prove that I created this campaign. Every idea, every detail." The room fell silent. Maria, with her penetrating gaze, added, "And that's not all. There's a more serious issue that needs to be discussed." All eyes were on us. I turned to the senior executive, who was present at the meeting. "Brian is involved in a secret relationship with one of the company's top executives. This relationship explains why he has escaped the consequences of his actions for so long." The executive tried to deny it, but I was ready. "Here are the compromising messages," he said, projecting onto the screen a series of conversations that left no doubt whatsoever. The shock was instantaneous. The room became even quieter, if that was possible. Brian was visibly disconcerted, his usual confidence evaporating. "This is a trap," he stammered. "You guys can't do that." Lucas calmly responded, "We can and we are. It's time for justice." The senior executive, desperate to save her own skin, began to speak. Brian was involved in something bigger. He embezzled agency funds. The revelation came as a shock to everyone. Brian was immediately removed and a formal investigation was launched. Lucas, Maria, and I were acclaimed for our courage and determination. Finally, justice was being done. I received a promotion and public recognition for my work. The agency underwent a complete reform, promoting a fairer and more transparent work environment. As I left the conference room, I felt a huge weight lifted from my shoulders. I knew that despite the risks, I did the right thing. And I was ready for a bright future in my career. "We did it, Jessica," Lucas said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Yes, we did it," I replied, with a smile of relief. And that's just the beginning. The day of the presentation arrived, and I was a nervous wreck. Lucas and Maria were also visibly anxious, but determined. We knew this was our only chance to unmask Brian and expose corruption at the agency. We arrived at the conference room early to make sure everything was in order. I took my laptop and a flash drive with all the evidence we had collected. Lucas, with his technical knowledge, had already guaranteed that nothing would go wrong with the presentation. Brian entered the room with his usual air of superiority. He shot a quick look at me, as if he already knew I was up to something, but he had no idea what was coming. The room slowly filled with team members, including the senior executive Brian was involved with. Everyone sat down, and the atmosphere was filled with anticipation. Brian began the presentation with his rehearsed speech, trying once again to steal credit for the work I had put in so many hours. "I would like to highlight the importance of this campaign and how I, personally, developed some of the core ideas that got us here," he said, with a self-assured smile. I knew it was the right time. I raised my hand, interrupting Brian mid-speech. "I'm sorry, Brian, but I think it's important to clarify a few points before we continue," I said firmly. Brian tried to maintain his composure, but I saw a slight hesitation in his eyes. "Sure, Jessica, go ahead," he replied, with evident falsehood. I got up and connected my flash drive to the computer that was connected to the projector. "I would like to present some evidence that shows the true origin of the ideas for this campaign," I began, while Lucas and Maria watched me closely. I opened an email dated months ago where I discussed in detail the ideas Brian was trying to claim as his own. This is an email I sent to Brian with the first concepts of the campaign. As you can see, all the main ideas were outlined by me. The room fell silent as I showed him sketches, design files, and messages exchanged between Brian and me. Each document was irrefutable proof that the work was mine. I saw faces of surprise, some of indignation, and others of understanding. "But that's not all," I continued. "There is something more serious that we need to discuss. Brian is involved in a relationship with the company's top executive, which explains why he has escaped the consequences of his actions." The senior executive, present at the meeting, looked pale and uncomfortable. Brian tried to interrupt. "That's a personal attack, Jessica. It has nothing to do with work." "I have messages here that prove this relationship," I replied, projecting compromising conversations between Brian and the executive onto the screen. The tension in the room was palpable. The executive tried to deny it, but the evidence was too clear to ignore. "This is an invasion of privacy," she exclaimed, but her words sounded weak and desperate. Maria, who had been quiet until then, decided to intervene. "This isn't just about privacy. It's about integrity and fairness in the workplace. Everyone here deserves to know the truth." The team began to murmur, and I saw that many were on our side. The revelation had had the desired impact. Brian was visibly disconcerted, not knowing how to react. He looked at the senior executive, who was avoiding his gaze. The meeting ended with Brian unmasked and the senior executive in an extremely compromising position. The agency had no choice but to launch a formal investigation. Lucas, Maria, and I were applauded for our courage and determination in exposing the truth. We felt that justice was finally being served, and that the agency's toxic culture was about to change for the better. The moment Brian started speaking, I felt my heart beat so hard it seemed like everyone in the room could hear it. He was, once again, trying to appropriate my work, presenting my ideas as if they were his. I took a deep breath and looked at Lucas and Maria, who gave me an encouraging wave. It was now or never. "I'm sorry, Brian, but I have to interrupt," I said, getting up from my chair. The room was silent, All eyes turned to me. Brian looked at me with surprise and a hint of irritation. "What are you doing, Jessica?" he asked, trying to maintain his composure. "I'm presenting the true origins of this campaign," I replied firmly. I walked to the front of the room and connected my laptop to the projector. "I have proof that the ideas you are presenting are mine." Brian laughed nervously. "That's ridiculous, Jessica. Everyone knows this campaign was a team effort." "Yes, it was a team effort. But the ideas you are presenting as yours are, in fact, mine," I insisted. I started showing the emails, drafts and documents that prove my authorship. "Here are the messages exchanged between me and the team, with dates and times, showing that I developed these ideas." The room fell silent as I went through the evidence. I could see the looks of shock on my colleagues' faces. Brian began to sweat, clearly uncomfortable. "That doesn't prove anything," he said, trying to maintain authority. "Anyone can forge emails." "I'm not done yet," I announced, feeling confidence growing within me. "And I have witnesses." I looked at Lucas and Maria, who got up and walked to the front of the room. "Jessica is telling the truth," Lucas said. "I myself have seen Brian take other people's ideas and present them as his own. This has happened to me several times." "Brian has been doing this for years," Maria added. "We are tired of this injustice." Murmurs began to spread throughout the room as my classmates processed the information. Brian was visibly struggling to maintain his composure. I decided it was time to deliver the final blow. "There's one more thing you need to know," he said, looking directly at Brian. "Brian has a secret relationship with a senior executive at the company." The room was completely silent. I could hear the sound of someone swallowing hard. Brian went pale. "That's a serious accusation, Jessica," he said, trying to sound confident, but the tremor in his voice was evident. "I have proof," I replied, projecting a series of compromising messages between Brian and the executive. These messages leave no doubt about their relationship. The executive, who was present at the meeting, tried to intervene. "This is an invasion of privacy, Jessica. You cannot use this information." "It's not an invasion of privacy when it comes to exposing corruption," I retorted. "You two have been manipulating the agency for your own benefit, and that needs to stop." The room erupted in murmurs and whispers. Brian was visibly shaken, and the executive looked like she was about to faint. That's when the agency's CEO, who was present, stood up and asked for silence. "We will investigate these allegations immediately," he said, with a tone of urgency. "If this evidence is true, there will be serious consequences." The meeting ended with Brian and the executive being ushered out of the room for a formal investigation. My colleagues started applauding me and congratulating me on my courage. Lucas and Maria hugged me, relieved and proud. "You did it, Jessica," Lucas said, smiling. "You finally exposed the truth." "It was something that needed to be done," I replied, feeling a mixture of relief and satisfaction. "Now, perhaps we can work in a more fair and transparent environment." Little did I know that this was just the beginning of the changes to come. Brian would be fired and sued, and the agency would undergo a complete overhaul. I finally felt like justice had been done, and I was ready for a bright future in my career. With Brian visibly disconcerted, I knew it was time to deliver the final blow. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. The room was plunged into tense silence, all eyes fixed on me. I got up from the chair and, with a firm voice, began to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen, what I'm going to reveal now goes beyond the issue of idea theft. What's at stake here is the integrity of our agency and the transparency of our leaders. Brian Anderson didn't just take ownership of the work of his team members, but he is also involved in an inappropriate relationship with a senior executive at this company." A wave of murmurs spread through the room, and I could see the color drain from Brian's face. He tried to interrupt, but I didn't give him space. "Before anyone questions the veracity of my words, I have brought proof." I projected a series of text messages and emails onto the auditorium screen. The words were there, unmistakable, showing exchanges of affection and discussions about how Brian could avoid consequences for his actions. The senior executive, who was present at the meeting, stood up abruptly, visibly nervous. "This is nonsense. These messages were clearly fabricated," she exclaimed, trying to maintain her composure. "That's not true," I replied calmly. "These messages have been verified and authenticated. And if that's not enough, we also have witnesses who are willing to talk." Maria, who was sitting next to me, stood up. "I've been here for years and I've seen and heard a lot that confirms what Jessica is saying. This isn't the first time I've seen Brian benefit from his relationship with this executive to escape the consequences of his actions." Lucas also got up. "And I have something to say too. I have been witnessing this type of behavior for a long time. The evidence is here, and it is irrefutable." The atmosphere in the room was electric. The murmurs increased, and the senior executive began to visibly sweat. Brian seemed to have lost the ability to speak, just staring blankly at the screen, whereas compromising messages were exposed for all to see. The agency's CEO, who until then had been silent, finally spoke out. "This is very serious. We will need a full investigation to understand the extent of this situation. I knew this was a start, but it wasn't enough for me. I know everyone here wants justice and transparency. That's why my colleagues and I are willing to cooperate fully with any investigation." The top executive, in a desperate attempt to save her own skin, decided to throw Brian further under the bus. "Brian, you did this all by yourself. I never agreed to any of this." She raised her hands, as if trying to distance herself from any guilt. Brian finally found his voice. "That's a lie. You were just as involved as I was. Don't try to blame me now." He was desperate, and his voice was shaking. The room was in controlled chaos, with everyone absorbing the gravity of the revelations. The CEO raised a hand, asking for silence. "Enough. This needs to be thoroughly investigated. Brian, you are suspended effective immediately. As for you," he turned to the senior executive, "we need to speak privately." With that, the meeting ended abruptly. Brian left the room with his head down, and the senior executive followed the CEO with a look of panic. Me, Maria and Lucas stayed behind, feeling a mixture of relief and tension. Lucas turned to me and said, "You did a great job, Jessica. Finally, justice is being served." Maria nodded. "Yes, you were brave. This needed to be exposed a long time ago." I smiled, feeling a huge weight lift off my shoulders. "Thank you, you guys. I couldn't have done this without the help of you too." As we left the room, I knew the battle was far from over, but at least now, the truth was out in the daylight. And this was the beginning of a new era for the agency. The meeting ended in a way I could never have imagined. Brian was unmasked, and the senior executive, whose name was Angela, found herself in an incredibly compromising position. The atmosphere in the room was tense, each person present absorbing the gravity of the revelations. Brian, who had always been the center of attention and power, now seemed tiny, devoid of his usual arrogance. Lucas, Maria, and I exchanged looks of relief and satisfaction. We knew that this would not be the end, but a beginning to significant change at the agency. The board decided that a formal investigation was necessary to understand the extent of Brian and Angela's actions. "Jessica, that was amazing," Lucas said, still visibly emotional. "I don't think I could do this without you." "Neither would I without you," I replied, feeling a huge weight being lifted from my shoulders. "But this is just the beginning. We have to make sure the agency actually changes." Maria, with her experience and wisdom, added, "You two showed a courage that few have. The truth always comes out, but we need to be prepared to deal with the consequences." The investigation began immediately. The board could not ignore the overwhelming evidence I presented. The emails, drafts, and documents that showed all the ideas were originally mine were just the beginning. The revelation of Brian and Angela's secret relationship added a layer of seriousness that the board couldn't simply sweep under the rug. In an emergency meeting, the board convened all agency employees. The general director, Mr. Thompson, took the floor. "We are deeply disturbed by the revelations made today. This agency has always prided itself on its integrity and ethics, and it is unacceptable that such practices have occurred. A formal investigation will be conducted, and we assure you that necessary action will be taken." Brian, who was still present at the meeting, tried to intervene. "This is a misunderstanding. The ideas were developed as a team, and the personal relationship did not influence our professional decisions." "Don't lie, Brian," Angela finally broke the silence. "We all know this goes beyond what was presented. I'm not going down alone." Everyone's eyes turned to Angela, who revealed something even more shocking. She said Brian was involved in a scheme to embezzle funds from the agency. The room erupted in murmurs and exclamations of surprise. "Are you crazy, Angela?" Brian screamed, desperate. "I have proof," she replied, her voice cold and calculated. "I'm not going to fall alone." Mr. Thompson called for calm and ordered Brian removed from the room. "We need to investigate this immediately. If these allegations are true, the consequences will be severe." Over the next few days, the agency was in a frenzy of activity and investigations. Brian was fired and sued by the company. The truth about the embezzlement of funds came to light, confirming Angela's words. The impact was monumental. Lucas, Maria, and I were recognized for our courage. I received a promotion and public recognition for my work. It was an indescribable feeling knowing that my voice was finally being heard and that justice was being served. The agency has undergone a complete overhaul, with new policies to promote a fairer and more transparent work environment. That night, as we celebrated in a bar near the office, Maria raised her glass. "Justice has been served, my friends. May new times of integrity and respect come." "To the truth," Lucas toasted. "Truly," I repeated, feeling a surge of hope and optimism for the future. I knew there would still be challenges, but I was more prepared than ever to face them. When the meeting ended, I thought everything was resolved. But what followed was a twist no one could have predicted. The senior executive, still recovering from the shock of having her secret relationship exposed, decided to play one last card to try to save her own skin. "I have something to say," she began, her voice shaking slightly. Everyone in the room turned to her, curious and apprehensive. "Brian has not only been appropriating the ideas of others. He is also involved in a larger scheme to embezzle funds from the agency." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I looked at Lucas and Maria, who were equally surprised. Brian, who was already pale, became even more livid. "This is nonsense," he exclaimed, trying to maintain his composure. "You're just trying to divert attention from yourself." But the executive was prepared. "I have proof," she said, opening her briefcase and pulling out a series of documents. "Here are the records of the financial transactions that Brian manipulated. He diverted money from the agency into personal accounts, using fake projects as a cover." The silence in the room was deafening. I could feel the tension in the air as everyone processed the new information. The agency director, who was present, took the documents and began to examine them. His expression became increasingly grim. "Brian, is this true?" he asked, in a voice that brooked no evasions. Brian tried to defend himself, but it was clear he was cornered. "These documents are forged. It's a conspiracy against me." "That doesn't seem contrived," the director replied, giving Brian a pointed look. "It appears very well documented. We will begin a formal investigation immediately." The room erupted in murmurs as everyone discussed what they had just witnessed. I felt like I was in a dream, unable to believe this was all really happening. Brian was escorted out of the room, visibly shaken. In the days that followed, a thorough investigation was conducted. The evidence presented by the executive proved to be irrefutable. Brian was fired and the company decided to sue him for embezzlement. Word spread throughout the agency, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like justice was being served. The director called a general meeting to announce the changes that would be implemented. From now on, we will ensure our work environment is fair and transparent. No one should have to fear being disrespected or having their work stolen. We are committed to making our agency a better place for everyone. It was at this meeting that I received the news that would change my career. Jessica Taylor, the director, called my name, and I stood up nervously. Your work and your courage in exposing the truth have not gone unnoticed. Starting today, you will be promoted to head of design. Congratulations, you deserve it. I was applauded by my colleagues, and tears of relief and joy rolled down my face. Lucas and Maria were next to me, smiling proudly. They also received recognition for their courage and support. Congratulations, Jessica, Lucas said, giving me a hug. You really deserve it. We're so proud of you, Maria added, holding my hand. This is just the beginning of a bright future. With Brian out of the agency and the top executive under investigation, the company began implementing a series of reforms to ensure nothing like this would happen again. New processes of transparency and meritocracy were established, and the atmosphere in the office changed drastically for the better. As I prepared to take on my new role, I felt a mixture of excitement and responsibility. I knew I now had the opportunity to make a real difference at the agency, fostering an environment where everyone could thrive without fear of injustice. Finally, I felt justice had been served. And with the support of my friends and colleagues, I was ready to face any challenge that came my way. The bright future I always dreamed of was finally within my reach.